Welcome everybody to the Ogden Way podcast, a place where we talk about Ogden stories. We talk about Ogden's people and the things that they do to make their lives better and make the lives of everyone else around them better. Because that is the Ogden Way, right? This is Shane Keyes, Lieutenant Shane Keyes with the Ogden Police Department. Best police department in the state of Utah.
100%.
100%, right?
Absolutely.
Thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, no problem.
So I asked Shane Keyes, Lieutenant Keyes, for the rest of the interview, Shane, to be here today because Shane is a bit of a history buff, turns out, right?
I'm not ashamed to say I'm a history nerd, for sure.
Right. Okay. We'll go dork.
Yeah,
Go
I'm
dork.
fine with that.
Okay. Dork's not technically typically the term you would use for a lieutenant like yourself,
Nah.
right? You've been through a lot. Like, tell us a little bit about yourself through the department.
Yeah. I started with Roy Police in 2006, and then I went to narcotics, to the Weber Morgan Narcotics Strike Force. I went there in 2009, got to do the narcotics work, including everybody always asks undercover. Yes, I got to experience a lot of that. And in 2011, Ogden was always the place I wanted to be, and I will say that with no shame. My goal in becoming a cop was to work for the Ogden Police Department. Ogden Police Department was full at the time I graduated the academy, so I went to Roy and bid my time. Anyway, in narcotics, got close with a lot of Ogden guys, and I was like, this is the place that I got to be. Like, there's no question. So as soon as I could, once my time was up in narcotics, came over to Ogden as a police officer, worked Squad 6, Area 5, which is 25th Street.
I was say, which means what?
The Bar District.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
Shout out to the Area 5 cars out there because
Yeah.
there's a sense of pride there if you work that district. And then after a few months, I went to the gang unit as a gang detective, was a gang detective from 2011 to 2015, and then went back to narcotics 2015 to 2017. I was promoted, left in narcotics as the sergeant on promotion. And then in 2018, I came out and went to patrol as a patrol sergeant for a few months, and then went to major crimes as a major crime sergeant. Then went back to gangs in 2020 to be a gang sergeant, and then went to community police, the night squad of community police in 2023, sergeant there, and then was promoted to lieutenant, and currently I'm the lieutenant on the weekend night shift.
Yes, you are. And I'm proud to say that I got to be the mayor that promoted you to lieutenant. Got to be a part of that.
That's a source of pride for me too.
Oh, thanks. I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
No, I remember you were really locked in. You were really focused, super professional, and it was fun to be able to help support you in that opportunity.
Well, that's awesome.
And because you earned it, you're prepared for it, you're ready for it, and you've proven us right every day since.
Well, thank
frankly.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, funny story about Shane. I knew who you were. You at one time, maybe you still do, you lived in my area, and you used to jog a lot. You ran a lot. You ran by my house quite a bit.
Yeah.
And I would see you, and you kind of knew me as a council member. I knew you as a cop.
Right.
Played a little bit of softball. Like,
Yep.
hey, that's that Shane Keyes guy. Didn't really know each other much. Well, when I was a council member, one of the big, I'll just say fights at the time, there was just a lot of contention around it, was the Marshall White Center.
Uh-huh.
And I had not connected any of the dots as to whose voice was on the podcast that I was listening to. But there's this podcast called Junction City Justice, right?
Yes.
And I looked up a episode. It was actually multiple episodes. Was it 2 or 3 parts on Marshall White?
It was a two-parter on
Two-part.
Marshall White, yeah.
On Doc White.
Yes.
Detective Marshall White.
Yeah.
Who lost his life in the line of duty, who was a big, passionate supporter of youth recreation in Ogden, a historical figure in Ogden, and of which, of course, our community recreation center is named after.
Yeah.
And I remember listening to your podcast, and I went back and told my wife, I'm going to go all in for the Marshall White Center, staying in its current location, and I think it's going to be the end of the road for me in politics because it's going to cost me a lot of relationships. But I've made the decision that I'm going to be on the right side of history.
Yeah.
And then we're just going to go on about our lives. And she said, that sounds perfect. Go do that. And then she said, well, what brought you to this point? And I said, I listened to this podcast. And in the podcast, you just call yourself Shane.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I don't mind if people know who I am, but I don't make it overt.
Because it's not about you. It's about the stories.
Exactly.
Right? Which is again, why you're a lieutenant, why we promoted you. You're selfless. You're a servant leader. But when I became mayor, I connected the dots because Cindy introduced me to you, and she connected them for me.
Yeah.
That you were Shane on the podcast, and I was like, no way. I shared that story, and I shared that story because it was so significant to my life and the work that we did to make sure that the Marshall White Center happened. But I also share the story because that is just Ogden in a nutshell.
Right.
It's like America's biggest small city or
Right.
something. But it goes to the fact that we are all in this together. We're all doing work to make good things happen. And one of the good things that you do, besides being a lieutenant and all of the other roles that you fulfilled in the Ogden Police Department, is that you spend time on your own dime developing this podcast about the history of our police department.
It's a passion project. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's not paying any bills, I'm sure.
No. No, and there's been, honestly, not to rabbit hole here, but there's a hosting platform, and the hosting platform is constantly offering to monetize it, but I've turned it down so far because, to me, that cheapens the message. I'm not saying I'm never going to do it, because never say never about anything, but at least for right now, I'm content with where we're at with it.
Well, it's probably going to monetize to like $20.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. Well, it's not worth it.
Who knows? I have no idea.
Yeah.
I have no idea. I know I love the episodes. In fact, you've actually done more episodes beyond just the police department too. You've done local war heroes as well.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, guys who we did a kind of a spin-off series called Ogden's Masters of the Air.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of tying in the last year they released Masters of the Air, and we thought it would be cool. Because if you think about it, you go to the cemetery and you see the wall of veterans who lost their life overseas in war. And those are just names on a wall. And if we can bring those names to life somehow, give you a sense of who that person was, then that makes it more to you than just names on a wall. That's a key piece of Ogden's history. Ogden's sons are buried overseas right now and will never come home. So that's something that I think is definitely worth our time, and we're going to do some more stuff like that in the future for sure.
Well, it's easy to say, but it's harder to do, but we owe that to them.
Absolutely.
And to their families and the loved ones that left behind, right?
Absolutely.
But that's an easy thing to say, but it's a hard thing to do, so I'm glad that you do it.
Oh, thank you.
And I know for me, if you haven't listened to any of these episodes, you really should. You will go through a rabbit hole. Like, I like to listen to it while I'm doing something.
Yeah.
If I'm working with my hands or doing yard work or whatever, I put it in the ear and listen to it, because there's some of them are a couple hours long, and they are stories about Ogden.
Oh yeah.
And they're stories through Ogden's people, which is exactly what this is.
Right.
These are the stories of Ogden.
Yeah.
As told through our people.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
And all within a context of trying to make sure that we are harnessing the best of ourselves.
Yeah.
And sharing the examples so that we can be an example for others to make Ogden better.
Exactly.
So that's what you're doing, but you're doing it retroactively, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Most of the vast majority of our episodes are involving Ogden's past. There's one episode where there's a current Ogden detective that talks about his great uncle that worked for Ogden as a detective.
Mm-hmm.
So we have fun telling that story. And he didn't know that his great uncle, Henry G. Allred, was an Ogden detective. But
that Henry G. Allred is family by marriage of my wife.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. See, and there's these cool connections that you can piece together. Is
that Ogden or what?
Yeah. Right.
Wow. Okay.
Big enough that it's got the big city vibe, but small enough that it's Ogden.
Right?
That's like the perfect city. That's what I love about it.
I actually do think we're the perfect size.
I agree.
Like, actually, the police department's the perfect size.
I agree.
We're the big dogs here in this area, and we are outfitted and resourced, and we are the best.
Right.
And all the roles that you had, that's what brings officers here, because there's so many opportunities and all these different specialties and units and things, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You want that variety in your career.
Yep.
But we're not such a big bureaucracy that you can't make change.
Exactly.
You can't turn and move and adapt and be data-driven and innovative. It's the sweet spot.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Big enough that we're classified as a big department, small enough that the chief can still know everybody and the mayor can know everybody, and big enough that it's, like I said, it's got that big city vibe, but small enough that you know everybody and you can effectuate change if you need to effectuate change.
Yeah, that's cool. So speaking of the chief,
yes,
Chief Jake Zuby,
yes,
currently, but the same thing applies for past chiefs. But one of the things I got to do as being mayor is to hire a new police chief.
Yeah,
that's a really serious thing.
Yeah, oh yeah.
In mayor school, which is a real thing, I went to mayor school for a minute. They taught us that the most important relationship you have in all of your administration and your tenure is with your police chief, period. If you don't have a good relationship, if you can't work together to make your city function and be safe, then you are not going to be an effective mayor. That's what they taught us. So I took that step very seriously.
Yeah.
And one of the questions I asked the candidates in the interviews was, why Ogden? But I also asked, what do you want your legacy to be as chief? What do you want to leave behind as your mark and your stamp? And Chief Zuby talked about how he'd like to engage with the youth, particularly around the Marshall White Center, especially with the message of what that means as to who it's named after, and the story of the 2-part series on Detective Marshall White in your podcast.
Yeah.
Everybody should listen to it. You have got to listen. If you live in Ogden, you have to listen to these 2 episodes.
What? 100%.
100%. You won't just understand the man, you'll understand the significance of the recreation center if you do.
Yeah.
And why it is where it is, because that's in the same corner where his home was that he lived in. Anyway, I'm on a tangent, but just plug in the episodes. You have to watch them.
Yeah.
But one of the things that he said that he wants to leave behind as his legacy is that he wants all of our officers to understand where they came from. Where, as a department, we all stand on the shoulders of those that come before us.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
It's one of my favorite things to remind new guys.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So you guys, in fact, we just swore in new officers. You guys are going back to one of your original badge in today's form, of course.
Yeah.
As a reminder of where we come from.
Yes.
And Chief Zuby is going to be bringing a lot more of these stories about the leaders in the past, making sure that we tell those stories. And you're going to be an enormous part of helping to do that.
I'm excited to do that because I think that's definitely one thing that we could do better at, is giving our new officers an understanding of the legends, the local legends that came before them and what they did.
The legacies.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
Well, and in the sense that one day there'll be generations looking at them the same.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely. Send that message home to the new guys. We, throw up some pictures of, and I'm just going to throw out some names here, but like Bill Milligan, legendary detective from the 20s to the 40s in Ogden. Charles Everett Noble, same type of thing, same type of time period. Barlow B. Wilson, Ogden police officer, became Weber County sheriff, came back to Ogden to be the sergeant, and there's a whole rabbit hole I could go down. I called him B.B. Wilson, but, you put some of those guys up and show the guys these are the people that came before you, and then you hit them with, maybe at some point you're that guy.
Yep.
50 years from now, 100 years from now, that's your picture up there that people are like, wow, how did insert officer's name here do what he did during his time frame?
Right. How did he become that man? Or
yeah,
how did she figure that out?
Yes.
When she was on the streets, and what was it like back then?
Well, and that's,
right?
I go back to James Pender a lot. James Pender was our first episode, and he was the first chief of detectives of the Ogden Police Department. And he's kind of an interesting cat in the sense that he was brought in to be the chief of detectives at Ogden. Law enforcement was very new. It was a new idea at the time. I mean, you had constables and you had town marshals and things like that, but the idea of a municipal law enforcement was new. And then detectives, the thought of a detective, someone whose job it was to follow up with previously committed crimes and actually go out and detect, that's like a revolutionary idea at the time. And Pender was a former scout in the Indian Wars for the cavalry. So he was a Union Army scout. Comes to Ogden, just a tough old cowboy, and becomes this legendary detective, and then has to navigate the streets of Ogden. And there was ever-changing politics back then in the mayor's office between the different political parties. And so he's got to navigate that and maintain his position. And then also at the same time, he's got to navigate the criminal underworld, which is run by Belle London. at the time on 25th Street. So Pender's this. I've made this joke before that if HBO wanted to, you could have an incredibly entertaining period miniseries on Ogden of the early 1900s and the fascinating cast of characters that were there. But to get to Pender, he's got to navigate all that in an era where people are still trying to figure out what policing is and is supposed to be. And this is pre all kinds of case laws that we have now. So these guys are just, now we have established academies and we have things like that. And these guys are just figuring it out as they go along. It's like you're hired as a police officer, go out and be a police officer.
Right.
Figure it out and good luck to you on 25th Street.
That's crazy. So if you love Ogden and you really want to know its history, you can track, honestly, American history.
Oh yeah,
through the Ogden Police Department.
Yes,
because American history, it unfolded on 25th Street.
Yes,
it unfolded right out the steps of the train through the Union Station onto 25th Street. Like when I hear the stories on your podcast, like I feel like I understand what it was like to live in Ogden back then just through your voice.
That's awesome. That's the goal. That's the goal, is to give people at least a perspective of the period. You know,
history's making a comeback.
Yeah.
Right. It's cool again.
Yes.
So dorks like you,
we're about to rule again.
Yeah, exactly. You're popular. Yeah, but I say that with all sincerity. It's really important to capture this stuff so that people, and it's really important that we all go out and listen to it, so that we can understand where we come from. Yeah. And I'm trying to decide, is that HBO episode, would that be a good thing for Ogden now or a bad thing? Because it would be such a cool story.
It would. And
it's so Ogden.
It's something that would be akin to, at least the way I picture it, Peaky Blinders or, I lost Steve Buscemi. Boardwalk Empire. Yep. Boardwalk Empire is maybe even more appropriate, but you would just tell it, from Pender's standpoint.
I was going to say without all the money, but it is with the money because we had more millionaires per capita than anywhere else in the U.S.
Oh yeah. Well, and that takes you down another rabbit hole. Bob Burke, who was really like Pender revolutionized the chief of detectives, and then Bob Burke sort of became the peak detective, and he's about a generation after Pender. But he investigated the Eccles mansion being blown up by a Black Hand gang at the time. So you had, and it's right there. You're probably picturing it in your head in terms of downtown. I know exactly where Ogden. It is. Yeah. So the Eccles family, and this is what's fascinating about Ogden as a whole. Key rail stop. Right? Ogden itself as a city has its municipal police department. But when you think about the transitory population, the thousands of people pouring in and out of Ogden on a daily basis.
In and out.
And you've got professional athletes like Jack Dempsey was very familiar with Ogden. We'll talk about it, I'm sure, but boxing. Jack Dempsey is a local. He wasn't born in Ogden, but he was very familiar with Ogden, made a number of stops in Ogden, refereed boxing matches in Ogden. And this is at a time when the heavyweight champion of the world is the highest figure in all of sports. And
Which
then you've got
Jack Dempsey was.
Yes. Yeah. At the time.
Just to be clear.
And then you've got Teddy Roosevelt coming through Ogden.
I've seen those pictures.
Right. You've got, and then you've got the criminal element that comes through Ogden, and the Ogden Police Department is tasked with maintaining order of all of it. Because as soon as you get off the train, you're no longer Union Pacific's problem. You're now Ogden City's, and 25th Street is right there. And the Ogden Police Department at that time had to deal with all of it. So I marvel. That's why I've spent a lot of time in that early 1900s time period, because I marvel at what those guys were able to do. Right. Based on their limitations that they were stuck with.
I mean, so every time we do a new hiring or lateral transfers or a promotion ceremony, I'd give the same speech. We talk about our agreement with one another, that our compass is the Constitution. It's the rule of law.
Yes.
We expect everybody in the city to follow the law, but we demand of ourselves that we do.
Yes.
We demand it of each other. I even ask you to demand it of me.
I remember you looking right at me and telling me this when I was promoted to lieutenant.
Because when you're a lieutenant, you're the one that's going to be holding people accountable to make sure.
Yep.
You're the grown-up in the room, whatever you want to say.
Right.
Like, you have the rank. You have to make sure that those are the people that you're supervising, and sometimes you're your friends. That's what we talked about in your ceremony.
Yep.
I say all that because that's who we are.
Right.
but at the time we had a constitution, but they didn't have all the case law, all the best practices and the policies. They were, like you said, they just said, go figure it out. Here's your badge.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And so as an institution, policing was figure it out as you go.
Yep.
And people were figuring it out all kinds of ways, I guess.
Yeah.
Right?
They were laying the foundation that we later built on.
Right.
You know, that's exactly what they were doing, is guys like Pender and Burke were figuring out best practices for interview and interrogation and investigation of burglary rings and thefts and things like that. They were figuring out for themselves the best practices so that we could borrow from them and adapt it and continue to use those investigatory practices.
I think about the story you told about Marshall White. It sounded like Marshall White was a pretty strong dude.
Yes.
He was a very capable physical man.
Had to be.
Had to be,
yes.
Right? But he also carried a lot of street cred.
Yes.
Not just because he was physical, but people really respected the man.
Yep.
And other officers, white officers in particular, often relied on him and called on him for help. So like, this is what we're trying to figure out. This is who we're talking to. We can't just fight about it. We got to talk about it.
Right.
And Marshall White would come in, and he had this presence, didn't he?
I feel like I've been very blessed because I got to know Ron in doing the podcast, his son.
Ronnie White.
Yeah, and I got to know his grandson, and I actually collaborated on the book review of him on the podcast. But everything, and Marshall White was one of the main influences for starting the podcast, because I was driving around the city one day and I drove past the Marshall White Center, and I thought, it's in the old Marshall White Center, and I thought, here, I know who Marshall White is, and I know he lost his life in the line of duty, but it's regrettable that I don't know more about him and that the people of Ogden don't know more about him. And then as I started to research him, I'm like, my God, this man has an aura. Like this, it projects through the histories that Marshall White, when he was coming down the street, had an aura about him. And,
that's right.
And he wasn't, he was physically tough. There is no question about it. At the time, if not the toughest, one of the toughest cops on the Ogden Police Department. But it was always said about him, he used his words first. And in fact, that's what ends up getting him murdered, is that, youth juvenile with a gun, and he tried to talk him down first, and the juvenile
shot him in the
fire
stomach
on him.
Yeah.
But it's apparent when you study and not just talking to the family, but really study in depth the aura of Marshall White, that's exactly what he had, was this aura. He was larger than life.
Yeah, and I don't know if you explained it that way in the episodes or not, but that's certainly what I remember.
Yeah.
That was my takeaway.
I'm glad. I'm glad.
I don't even think you use those words.
I don't, I've had a lot of time. That's the thing. You do an episode but you're not necessarily done, because you still come across, and no matter how exhaustively you research something, you come across more information. And,
I'm sure.
And so, there are some that if I could go back and do over again, I'm happy with the way they all turn out. But the one thing that I would definitely do with Marshall White, and I'm glad you said that it comes across, at least in the episode, if I don't use the words, is talk about that, we use these terms, but I mean these things as literally as I can mean them in the hyperbolic sense. But he was a mountain of a man. He was an aura. He was a legend. He wasn't, and he was that way. I think the best way I heard it put was, even if he hadn't been murdered in the line of duty, the Marshall White Center should still be called the Marshall White Center.
Wow, that's amazing.
Because of the type of person that he was.
All right, so for viewers and listeners, just know when you download these episodes and listen to them, you can tell by listening to Shane's voice, just the way he shares the story. I got the sense that Marshall White had an aura, whether you use those words or not. The presence of the man. You have an ability to tell the story, but you also have the ability to dig out the details, to put them together in a factual way, but to tell it in a way that's representative of history, really representative of the history, the good, the bad, the ugly, whatever.
Right.
The point is not to create an aura that didn't exist. It's to share the aura that was.
Right. Yeah.
That's how you honor the man.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Right? I agree 100%.
So if you're on the fence of listening to these episodes, go.
Yeah.
Hurry. Stop, go. Quit listening to this one. Go get that one. But those stories,
Listen to both.
Yeah, after this one. but we tell those stories. Let's get back to what it's like to be a cop in Ogden.
Okay.
Because I hear it from so many officers here, including multiple generations. Just 2 days ago, we just swore in another officer who was a second-generation officer in his family. There is so much pride in being a part of this department because there's pride in being a part of greatness.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
So tell me about how your podcast and all the research you do, digging through all these records that we still have.
Yeah.
How does that help with your pride in being an officer at OPD?
Oh, I was always a very proud Ogden police officer. And once I really started becoming a student of the officers that came before us, I mean, it's hard to put a number to, but that magnified by 100.
Mm-hmm.
You know, again, when you realize the guys that have, and this is like the history nerd in me, but I like to find out where things happen in the city and then go stand in those places and just try to get a sense of what it could have been like. And then you think to yourself, you know, this is the spot where, and I say in the episode, an individual who wasn't as enlightened as we are now told Doc White that he was not going to stop for a police officer who was black. Mm-hmm. And this is the spot where Doc White shot his tires out of his car and said, looks like you're
looks
stopped
like
now.
You're stopping. Yeah.
You know, but you know, and that's, you know, a long time ago again, but I like to stand in those places and get a sense of the guys that came before me, and that they at one time I'm standing in the same places as Marshall White or as Bill Milligan. And it would be my hope that in some small way, the podcast and I know because they talk to me, but for the officers that listen to it, that it has given them a sense of pride in the city, because we are, you know, I'm not throwing shade at anybody else or anywhere else, but no one can really lay claim to the things that the Ogden Police Department can lay claim to in the sense of the history and the traditions. I mean, that's not to say there aren't history and traditions in other cities. There certainly are, but at least for our state, Ogden's got everyone beat by history and tradition.
One of the terms we use, especially lately around here, is with housing being a topic of the day, is we call ourselves, relative to all the other cities in the state of Utah, a legacy city. Yeah. Because we're one of the older cities. We're built out. We can't fix the housing problem the way every other city can. Yeah. So we call ourselves a legacy city, and it applies here. Yeah. We're absolutely a legacy department, a legacy city. We are the legacy of Northern Utah when it comes to police work. Oh yeah. And really a lot of history up here. Yeah. It was Ogden. It started in Ogden. It is Ogden. Right. And that's you see that not only now, I mean, because, you know, we're the biggest city, the biggest department in the area, I would argue, and other people might argue with me, but I would say we're the most innovative in the things that we are doing. And history, at least, would prove me correct in that Ogden has always been that way. Right. We've always been at the forefront, and then people catch up. Like, I bet we were the first department in Northern Utah to put officers in the schools. I would think so. We've got SROs. We have the best and the most well-developed intelligence apparatus. Right. Yep. Even Salt Lake PD doesn't have what we have. People would assume that they don't. You know what I mean? Right. No, but we do. I'm thinking the Area Tactical Analysis Center, the things we've done with the Crime Reduction Unit, the task forces that we've created with federal agencies. You know, the Community Police Bureau in and of itself and what they accomplish on a daily basis. You know, and then putting advocates with the Community Police Bureau. We're very forward thinking that way. Right. You know, I mean, and it carries over to fire too, with fire saying, what can we do to put mental health professionals in a place where they can respond to mental health crises and calls. Yep. With our officers and with our fire department. It's this innovation around problem solving. And it gets back to the sense that we're big enough to be resourced and small enough to be innovative. Right. Absolutely. Right. And if you notice, other places copy what we do, and imitation is the most sincere form of flattery. That's correct. So for anybody that's listening to the podcast, I don't say this lightly. Like I came to this role as mayor with a level of respect for OPD. I did. It was built in. But anytime a new mayor comes in, especially with the police, especially when you're an elected official and a politician, there's this like, how are you going to treat us? Like, what's this going to be like? Are you going to use us to get cheap shots in the headlines? Are you going to politicize us? Right.
It's kind of like, wonder how this is going to go.
Right.
Wonder how this is going to go.
And if you're wondering like why that's so important, it literally could mean their freedom if they're not treated with fairness and respect.
Right.
According to the rule of law. That's why we talk about the Constitution being our compass.
Absolutely.
That we don't just expect, we demand it of ourselves, right? So when we get to be that kind of a department, we get to invest in the information, in the data, into the solutions, instead of having to invest our energy into wondering or doubting or worrying.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I have come to this position with OPD of respect. I come by it honestly and naturally. I come by it through genuine observation and experience. I come by knowing with certainty that OPD is the best department in the state of Utah because I've seen the things you've done. I've seen the hard things that no one knows.
Right.
Because they're too hurtful and too personal.
Right.
That we don't talk about them.
Right.
But I've been there with you and seen you go through them as a department. You can't have those kinds of experiences without coming away with a level of respect and admiration that I do. If I did, I wouldn't be a good mayor for you. So the history of our department and who we are today gives me an immense amount of pride. And I'm not an officer at OPD, but I sure wish I could be. I just want to be a small part in helping to continue the legacy that you guys are building. That it's just a legacy of excellence, a legacy of integrity and of character, right?
Well, and there's no doubt when you say it, I 100% believe what you're saying to be true. That's kind of been apparent from the jump or from the get-go, is that there, going back to what we talked about earlier, at least with those of us that had been around, because we joke there's always a wonder how this is going to go,
right?
But the vast majority of us were like,
it'll be okay.
Good. We're fine. Like,
honestly, I actually talked with Chief about this. I needed time on my own to learn and to see and just to grow to where we are.
Yeah.
Because I'm not one to just, it's not that I don't trust. It's just that I have to learn and read it and see it for myself. And then I will truly, truly believe it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I get that. That's kind of a similar type of way.
Honestly, and in a testament to the OPD, you guys let me do that. There was a time where I said, I need all the records for something. All of them. And it took me a month or month and a half to make it through. On my own, independent. And I arrived at the exact conclusion that you had as a department, not you.
Right.
And that was important for me because it showed me on my own that I can count on what I'm being told,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I don't know.
I get what you're saying in the sense of like, it's not just, look, we all want to believe what we're told, right? But
sure.
We all have, at least those of us that are like-minded. I mean, and I think you have a inquisitive or, an investigatory mind. So you're like, yeah, I want to believe what I'm told, but I also want to see it. And
I want to know it.
And know it for myself.
Right.
And then, but I think probably we're the same way in this regard as once you do that a couple of times with a certain source, you're like, that's what builds the trust. And then you're like, okay, look, I can research for myself, but I believe it because that's what I'm being told. As opposed to, I think hopefully I'm making sense here in the sense that if we just go around believing what we're told and never researching for ourselves, there's a chance we're going to get blindsided.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
But if we research for ourselves and we see that what we're always being told by a certain source is accurate, then there's a lot of trust there, and then you don't have to research.
It's really helpful.
Yeah.
So basically, what I'm explaining is that you earned my respect as a department, and I hope that I've earned your respect as mayor because I have been and said what I said I would be.
Oh, 100%.
Right, and so, but this is incredibly important because as we talk about the legacy of the department, I've got 90,000 people that basically hired me. Well,
right.
Slightly less than half didn't. But I am their mayor too.
Right.
And everybody out there is expecting and demanding, and they deserve to know that they've got a mayor that does the work to confirm and to earn, right?
Yeah.
The respect. It's not just blind loyalty.
Right.
Like, my admiration is real, and it was earned by every man and woman in that department. And so I share that because it's serious.
Yeah.
This is serious work.
Yeah.
You love being a cop.
Oh, yeah.
You love OPD.
Yes.
But the consequences of mistakes are serious.
Yes.
Marshall White, the consequences were serious. But that was a kid. Knowing him, he wasn't going to go in with a gun first. He wanted to talk that kid out of it because it was a kid.
Right, and he dealt with him before.
He had. And he wanted that kid to be safe.
Yeah.
And it cost him his life. But that's how much he cared.
Yeah.
As we talk about the legacy of our department, we all have to understand what we are stewards of.
Yes.
I feel that weight as the mayor, even though I don't carry the badge on myself. And I'm sure you guys carry the weight of that. Right?
100%. I mean, it's commonly heard around there in terms of, guys deal with all types of people in all types of moods, and whether cooperative or uncooperative, they're all entitled to the same constitutional rights.
Right.
And we swore to uphold the Constitution of the United States. So we didn't just swear that we would uphold the Constitution when people are nice to us. We uphold the Constitution, nice, confrontational, doesn't matter, right? And so, and that's something that officers keep in mind every day when they go out on the street.
And we have to have a system of accountability.
Yes.
Accountability starts with an expectation, and then the expectation is the Constitution, and that and that the Constitution is what we hold each other to, and that there's a system of making sure that that's happening, and that there's coaching along the way if there's anything that veers, but if there's something seriously sideways, that there's a standard that you don't meet. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And I talk about this with the officers, and I just can't believe that we're not talking about it more as a country. That's the agreement. That's the arrangement we have here in the United States of America, and I can't tell people enough how much the officers, that's all they ask for. I say, I'm not going to protect you by covering up for you. And they're like, we don't want you to.
Right.
I go, I'll protect you when you protect the Constitution and you protect people's rights.
Right.
You follow the rule of law, and you use your training, and you use everything that we give you to do things right. Then I'll protect you.
Yeah.
Because that's what you deserve. And they're like, that's all we ask.
Right.
I mean, it is so easy that way. And that's the department we have, and it's all built on this legacy, these years of people giving of their lives and learning the hard way, right?
Yeah.
Creating an industry that didn't even exist.
Oh, yeah.
Positions that didn't exist.
Yes.
Years of innovation.
Yes.
So I'm really excited about what Chief Subi wants to do by bringing this legacy out in the history of our department and talking about it all the time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Because he talked to me a little bit about that, and I was absolutely over the moon about the opportunity to, you have young officers learn about the officers whose shadows we all stand in from 100 years ago, and again, we're the ones, Ogden are the ones that can lay claim to that more than anywhere else.
Yep. One of the things about Ogden PD and Ogden in our history that I definitely want to revive, speaking of, is you mentioned Jack Dempsey.
Yeah.
Heavyweight champion of the world.
Yeah.
Guy's a legend.
Oh, yeah.
He's been in Ogden. He's refereed fights here. I want to bring boxing back. We used to be a boxing city.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And shout out, to Foley's. There's a boxing gym out there.
Right.
That's...
But you're a boxer?
Yes,
right?
I am. Yep.
So, yeah, not that we don't have boxing here.
Right.
We've actually got boxing in a lot of places in this town.
Yeah.
But we don't want to bring it back to the front. You know what I mean?
I agree. Yeah.
I want to bring it back to the level that it was, to where now we've got boxing in garages, boxing at Foley's.
Right.
We've got some training a little bit in the two high schools.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we had real world-class talent here.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yes. Yeah, there was a lot of boxers that came through Ogden or came up in Ogden, a lot of undercard fighters, but Ogden really has this historical connection with boxing that, at least through my research, no other Utah town can claim. Correct. in terms of that. And so Ogden is, like you said, it's a boxing city. We have, he's no longer with us, but JJ Cottrell was a longtime boxing coach out at Marshall White, actually, to tie everything together. And he brought up the generation of boxers that trained my generation of boxers. And so I think that there's definitely a piece there that we could do a lot more with here in Ogden with boxing. I started a police department. It was myself and another officer named Ernesto Juarez at the time. We started a boxing club at the PD just to give guys an outlet for stress and physical fitness. And really, a lot of the people there at the PD took to it by storm. And it's become one of the more enjoyed programs from what I've heard at the police department. And to sort of, again, tie everything together, there was an officer who was heavily involved in the police athletic leagues in the 50s and 60s and 70s. And his name was Tim Dyer, and he was a sergeant. And he was so involved in youth sports. He was another episode we did. Mm-hmm. And after really going into it, not knowing a lot about him, coming out of it after doing all the research, I was like, we should have a statue of this man somewhere in the city, because he was in the Navy in World War II. He boxed on his ship. So he was his ship boxing champion. We talk about it in the episode. He sparred Archie Moore when Archie Moore was the light heavyweight champion of the world. He actually stopped him for speeding in Ogden.
Didn't you have him in your interview?
Tim Dyer, I had his daughter in the episode.
Okay.
He's passed. But Archie Moore was in town for a fight. Again, Ogden's connection to boxing. Speeding through.
That's right.
Yeah.
I remember the story. Yeah.
Speeding through, Tim Dyer stops him.
Yep. Okay.
And he says, I'm going to let you off with a warning. And then the next day, Tim's driving down Washington Boulevard, and this car behind him is just riding his tail and flashing him and high beaming him. And finally he gets mad because he's in his patrol car, and he pulls over. It's Archie Moore. Mm-hmm. And Archie Moore says, you didn't give me a ticket, and I'm going to give you 2 tickets to my fight.
To the fight, yeah.
So thanks for not giving me the ticket. And then he goes, what are you doing right now? Tim says, just heading into work. He said, you think you could get excused for a little break? And I got to have this open media sparring session. And Tim Dyer goes and spars the light heavyweight champion of the world at the time, Archie Moore, at his local sparring session before his fight at what was then Pioneer Stadium.
Classic.
Yeah, just
classic.
Right? Like, and so we've had this connection. Tim Dyer did the police athletic league stuff. He was involved in almost every youth athletic league, and he's in a way the inspiration for, getting more involved in the community in boxing, if that makes sense. I think there's a lot of opportunities there.
So we talk about this a lot when we talk about the Ogden way, and we'll conclude with this thought, because you're talking about the way Ogden was.
Yeah.
Classic Ogden. Oh man, if that isn't just the way things were, we look back at those times with some nostalgia. But what we need to remember is that nostalgia is a reflection of what we wish we still were.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
And so there are lessons that they withstand the test of time. Like, it doesn't matter how far advanced we are, we still need to share some of those values that we had back then.
Right.
So we're going to bring boxing back to this town.
Beautiful.
Right? We've got some really cool announcements that are going to be coming in the future.
Yeah.
We've got some really cool inroads. You're going to be a part of those. The Ogden Police Department is going to be a part of them.
Very excited.
Boxing was a part of this town. It needs to be a part of the connection between our cops and our kids.
Yeah.
Right?
Agreed.
Boxing's not what I first thought it was. When I first had this fear that, we're going to teach all our troubled youth how to fight, and then they're going to go out on the streets and fight. No, it's exactly the opposite. It teaches them discipline.
Absolutely.
It teaches them life lessons. It teaches them how to control their emotions.
Yep.
It teaches them how to direct their emotions and how to work hard. It teaches them how to be mentally tough and mentally focused. It teaches them how to get their academics in place, because they're not allowed to box if they don't have the grades.
Yeah.
It teaches them who our cops are, because you guys do it one-on-one with each other. It teaches them who we are, and it teaches them how to be their best.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
And that's why boxing is important to me. We have kids in this town that need that, and they need to learn it alongside our cops.
I'm very excited about the idea and about the prospect with it. And I think, I love the Ogden way, and you and I talked about this before, but, essentially it's grit and
Yep.
determination, right? And what is grittier and more determined than boxing?
Only Ogden.
Yeah,
Ogden is.
yeah.
So let's do boxing
and
in
that's
Ogden.
that's why Ogden and boxing go hand in hand perfectly,
Right?
Yeah,
That's why we are having these episodes. It's to tell these stories, but it's also to highlight the needs and to highlight the mindset. Like life is hard.
Yeah.
We are going to encounter challenges. And that's the last thing we should do is quit.
agreed.
You have to fail forward. You have to power through challenges to get to success. You have to earn success. And in the Ogden way, no one gives you anybody success. It has to be earned. And as we earn our success, as we rise, we lift others around us. As I rise, you rise. As we rise, we all rise.
Yeah.
Ogden rises, right?
Absolutely.
That's the Ogden way. So for a call to action, it's what we do for the end of every episode.
Okay.
Call to action today. Like, download the Dudes episodes. Go to your favorite podcast format, whatever you guys call them, and look up Junction City Podcast. You'll hear the voice. You'll recognize the voice. You wouldn't know otherwise. He just calls himself Shane. But he pours hours and hours and hours of time into digging through historical records, finding the truth, understanding the people behind the stories. It's the people that built the city, right? When people build a city, you build a community. That's what we're doing now. That's what they did then.
Yep.
We're telling the stories through today's people, telling stories of yesterday's leaders, right? We might be those people one day.
Yeah.
So go download those episodes, listen to Shane Kai's, tell the story of the Ogden Police Department, and through our department, through their greatness, through their grit and through their determination, tell the story of Ogden. That's your call to action. Make sure that you're paying attention to the people that are around you. Find someone that needs to be connected with an opportunity. Connect them with those opportunities and help them invest in themselves. When you do that, you help others rise. That is the Ogden way. Go to the website that we have on the screen, look up more about the Ogden way, read about more stories, listen to more episodes, get more in tune as to what you can do to make Ogden better. That's what we do here. God bless you all. We'll see you on the next episode. And thank you again, Shane.
Thank you. This has been awesome.